Reports are out that the Pittsburgh Steelers will not trade Mason Rudolph unless it's for considerable compensation. What does that mean? Why are they doing it? We'll talk about that and my breakdown of how I see the 53-man roster shaking out. I'm Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button in this video if you enjoyed. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content whenever we put it out. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. If you know about Prize Picks, first-time users can get up to 100% instant deposit match for up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON, Locked On at prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. We'll talk more about them later. But first, we got to get into some talk here about the quarterback situation. And it's not going to be just Kenny and Mitch because we've talked a lot about them. But reports came out from across the board, whether it was Dale Lawley, Jerry Dulac, Mark Caboli, a lot of the Steelers insider guys, and Tom Pelissero nationally as well, all of them saying that people are calling for Mason Rudolph. There are teams that are interested in trading. It's just that the Steelers don't want to give him up unless they're getting something considerable for him. And who's been telling you that this was going to be the case since March when they signed Mitch Trubisky? I guess since April when they also drafted Kenny Pickett, because that's what really sold a lot of people was that, Mason Rudolph is just going to get traded no matter what come the preseason. Me, if you didn't get what I was getting at there. Now, I'm not one to normally beat my chest about such things, but a lot of people called me foolish, said I was crazy, and I don't know what I was talking about, but I was telling y'all from the jump, the Steelers, they wanted 3 quarterbacks going into this season that they felt confident each of them could start, handle business if push came to shove. And Mason Rudolph's value, even as the third option on this team, is more important than a 6th or 7th round pick or even a 5th round pick moving forward. Now, I want to break down some counter arguments that I've heard out there because I've seen them all. I've seen Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all the people coming at, oh, why don't they get this for him? The Browns got a 5th for Baker Mayfield down the line. That's about what Mason's worth. Just because the Browns made a dumb move that put them in a position that they had to make a bad trade where the Carolina Panthers absolutely housed them for their former first overall pick, Baker Mayfield, who was supposed to be their second coming of Jim Brown. He was going to save the organization, save the franchise, all those things. Just because they got bullied into that situation doesn't mean that the Steelers should allow themselves to be in a similar spot. Another thing I think is very important to talk about with this situation is that there is value to what Mason Rudolph brings as a third option, not just as strictly a third quarterback, but the Steelers are in a position where if a quarterback goes down and that other quarterback is Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett who's sitting there, and that quarterback has a bad day, this is not an organization that has to sit there and just take it. This is not the days of Ben Roethlisberger when Ben Roethlisberger made mistakes. They just had to eat it because he was the franchise quarterback and they had to trust that he was going to turn it around. And sometimes he did, but sometimes he didn't. But with a Mason Rudolph in your back pocket, I'm pretty sure with the way that these guys have talked, their humility, their understanding of each other, their respect for each other in this quarterback competition, each of them, Mason, Mitch, and Kenny, would all understand if Mike Tomlin said, hey, good try today, but, it's the 4th quarter. You didn't throw in 3 interceptions, no touchdowns. We're still in the game because the defense is holding it together and Chris Boswell's making all the field goals. But this just ain't your day. We'll try again next week. We're going to give this other guy a shot. And that other guy may be Kenny Pickett for Mitch Trubisky at some point. But it also might be Mason Rudolph for either or of those guys. And it might just be a temporary situation. It also might be that both quarterbacks get hurt at some point because, as everyone knows, the offensive line has not looked good in preseason. And they're going to need to use their feet. And sometimes that can lead to crazy situations. But the value of that quarterback is Mason Rudolph. He's not your typical third-string quarterback. Think of all the third-string quarterbacks that you usually want to think about. Josh Dobbs, Devlin Hodges, Landry Jones in his younger years before he even got good enough to be the number 2 quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Dennis Dixon, those type of guys. Guys who didn't move the offense even in the preseason when they were out there. I think that's an important bar that the Steelers want to keep, and they don't want to just hand over for nothing. Now, according to reports, the Steelers are willing to trade him, but someone's going to need to give them decent compensation. And I think that decent compensation might even just be a third-round pick to recoup the pick that they spent on Mason Rudolph. Otherwise, they're like, you know what? We'll pay him $4 million this year. And personally, I think that's a fine price for what they're doing at the quarterback position. They want to be prepared for if things go south at any point, and if there's an injury and or a player is playing poorly. It's not that bad of an idea. And it's not like Mason Rudolph is taking up crucial salary cap space. If Mason Rudolph was like a $10 million hit against the salary cap, I'd totally understand that. That would be a horse of a different color. But he's not. And I think people need to stop acting like it's some crazy burden to carry him along the roster just because of that. I mean, look back. He, as much as we were hyping up what Mitch and Kenny did in the preseason, Mason also didn't throw a single interception. Mason also moved the ball considerably. Mason also threw a game-winning touchdown. Now, granted, you're not ready to crown him. You're not ready to send out and just say, "Hey, he's your QB1." I know some people are out there because there is a serious Mason Rudolph fan base, and I don't know what got into y'all. Y'all drink some crazy Kool-Aid, but hey, if that's your boy, that's your boy. But I told y'all he was never starting for this team, even when he was the best quarterback in training camp for the first week and a half. And I told y'all that was going to catch up to him when the other 2 quarterbacks got to understand the offense a little bit more and build some chemistry with the guys. But again, that's not a slight to Mason Rudolph. He's a 3rd-round draft pick quarterback. Mitch Trubisky is a former 2nd overall pick as a quarterback. Kenny Pickett is a 1st-round pick as a quarterback. And I know everyone's going to say, well, Mason Rudolph was said to be a 1st-round caliber quarterback. Well, he wasn't picked in the 1st round. And I think there was a reason for that. But I think, as I've said a lot of times, he deserves commendation. He deserves respect for hanging in there with the Steelers beyond just his getting beat up in his 2nd year in the NFL by Myles Garrett, Earl Thomas, and a whole number of people, and all the things that he withstood in those early years. But also this year, when finally he gets to be out from under the shadow of Ben Roethlisberger, and the Steelers go and sign Mitch Trubisky and then draft Kenny Pickett all in the span of a month. And Mason Rudolph could have took that personally. He could have thrown a hissy fit. He could have said, you know what, I'm just not playing for this team. Trade me. But he didn't. He hung in there, took it. And he still might at some point. But he took this competition straight up. He gave his best. And I think that Steelers fans, when the Steelers fans who were booing at the first preseason game, they know they're wrong. And I think the Steelers themselves know they're right for hanging on to Mason Rudolph to back up Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky should anything go awry. As I've said multiple times, Mason Rudolph is your break glass in case of emergency quarterback, and there's nothing wrong with keeping him there. But all right, enough about Mason Rudolph. Y'all want to talk about the 53-man roster. That officially will be announced by 4 p.m. today, Tuesday, August 30th. We'll get into my predictions, offense and defense. We'll talk offense in the next segment and then flow to the defense. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Prize Picks. Y'all know about Prize Picks. I've talked about it before. They're the new fun daily fantasy game that everyone needs to start playing right now. If you're big into fantasy sports, this is a way to get your daily fix in by selecting individual player projections and making a simple decision whether to get more or less of a set number of yards, touchdowns, and other key fantasy stats. And it's easy. You simply pick 2 to 5 players that you think you have a beat on for their day in fantasy. You choose whether they'll get more or less on certain stats and make as many entries in Prize Picks as you want. You can make up to 10 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against others. It's just about guessing right or on your more or less picks. Prize Picks includes the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL, college sports, and so much more. Download the Prize Picks apps or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive up to 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON, Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100 If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. It's all part of their promotion. Do go to prizepicks.com to get to check them out. And remember, use that promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, Locked On at your sign up to get that instant deposit match for up to $100 at Prize Picks, where all you're doing is just simply picking more or less for your way to make money on daily fantasy sports. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. We're getting into our 53-man roster projections here now. A lot of layers to this. So, of course, there's a few things that I think is going to come out here. One, this is not going to be how it ends up for week 1 for the season, because the Steelers have a few players who they're going to move to injured reserve, I believe, and then bring in guys that they either let go, who cleared waivers, or find other guys around the NFL. And I'm not saying that I'm going to be exactly correct, but this is just the way I think that they're going to play it out. I'll also just put a distinction where I think they should play it out differently. But let's get started. Let's do the easy one. Let's do quarterbacks and running backs in the backfield. If you're watching on YouTube, I just put the graphic up so you can read it. But your quarterback, this is easy. They're keeping Mitch and Kenny and Mason. I've already talked about this. You know my stance there. But running back is tricky because some of you probably looking at this screen and thinking, wait a minute, Najee Harris, Jalen Warden, Benny Snell, Derek Watt. What about Anthony McFarland? He's looked pretty solid. I agree. Anthony McFarland has looked pretty solid, but the Steelers seem to appreciate Derek Watt's use on special teams, even though he's been hurt for a lot of camp. I'm not so sure they're ready to part ways with him yet. I think him and Benny Snell, their special teams expertise is what's going to save them and keep them on the roster. That's going to give them 4 running backs. They don't want to go with 5 because then they'd have to make an even tougher cut at another position. Anthony McFarland, I think, is just in a rough spot. He made some plays there, and if it was my call, I'd try to keep him over maybe even Derek Watt, because I truly think Connor Hayward could do a lot of things that Derek Watt does. But I think him being TJ's brother, also him being able to play a lot of special teams, that they're gonna say, you know what, we'll take the loss of Anthony McFarland. We'll work it out. They really like Jalen Warren. I think he's truly locked himself into the RB2 position, and Benny Snell RB3, which means if they're running with those 3 guys, Anthony McFarland is unfortunately the odd man out. But hey, this is the NFL. There's tough calls like those all the time. Now, let's get to the wide receivers and the tight ends, because this is also not an easy set here. Now, when you look at the wide receiver position, I said that this was going to be one of the toughest ones to call. Now, you're probably going to say here, you're looking at the 6 people I have listed. I have the Steelers keeping 6 wide receivers on their initial 53-man roster: Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, George Pickens, Calvin Austin, Gunnar Olszewski, and Miles Boykin. Now, you're probably sitting there saying, well, Chris, what about Tyler Vaughns? What about Steven Sims? I agree. Both of those guys looked really good, but they're not letting Calvin Austin go. And yes, he hasn't played in the preseason game. He's been out missing a lot of time, but he's going to be a guy that once he clears the 53-man roster, he's going to go on injured reserve. And what's going to happen after that? They're going to hope that Steven Sims and or Tyler Vaughns make it through the waivers, and I think one of them gets picked up and put on the roster. The other one gets picked up and put on practice squad if they both make it. If one of them makes it, that person's probably going to make the initial 53-man roster that comes out after they start making IR moves. But that's how I see the top 6 receivers playing out. At tight end, pretty straightforward. You got Pat Freiermuth, you got Zach Gentry, you got Connor Hayward. I just think that's an easy call there. But the 6 wide receivers, saw that coming for a ways. I thought it's just too competitive to let any of those guys go. Miles Boykin, the way he's making back shoulder catches and catching with his hands, I think is very solid. I've been very up on Gunnar Olszewski. You can understand why. I think he's pretty shifty, helps on special teams. He's going to find a place there as well. Now, the offensive line, another place where it's tricky because they have not been good. And across the board, they got work to do. But let's see who I see them keeping. Now, center-wise, there's only 2 guys that you can really keep: Mason Cole, J.C. Hassenauer. You need a second center. Hassenauer hasn't looked great either, but Mason Cole has at least held it down. The guard position is where I think there could be some changes after the fact. I got them keeping 4 guards initially: James Daniels, Kevin Dotson, Kendrick Green, and John LeGlue. I do think that Kendrick Green has been almost unusable at times in these preseason games, and they might even look for a guy to sign from another team that will ultimately end up replacing him. But as far as tomorrow, Kendrick Green, I think, will still be on the roster, and they don't cut him right away. At tackle, Chukwuma Okorafor, Dan Moore Jr., Joe Haeg. I had them keeping 4. I don't think that they're too happy with what's going on there. That might be another position where they go get somebody else. But ultimately, I do think the Steelers are in a position where they can say, "Hey, offensive line, you haven't cut it out. We're going to let some other guys go." And there's other tough positions that they got to make tough calls at, like cornerback, like safety, like linebacker, like defensive line. And I think the Steelers will be silly to keep a bad offensive tackle on the roster, on their initial 53-man roster, for over a better player at another position where they could use that depth. So I don't think I'm crazy in saying that, but running backs, they'll keep 4. Offensive line, I think 9. Typically, you want to keep 10. You want to keep enough backup tackles, enough backup guards to back up each position. But I think there's going to be some maneuvering to go around there. Also, wouldn't be surprised if some of those IR moves were guys that are kept for the initial 53-man roster and then moved to injured reserve. Wouldn't be surprised if that comes back around and say like a Calvin Austin, his spot is actually given to a spot on the defense. But we'll talk about those spots in the defense really shortly here in a minute here. But first, I got to talk to you guys about a message from the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. You're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. A few becomes too many, and as the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. Nah, you're living nearby. You can make it home, okay? It's no big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, you total your car, you kill someone, you get the point. The risk does go up. Everyone knows about the risks of drinking and driving drunk, The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, finishing up my 53-man roster predictions, however you want to call them. But I want to switch to the defense here because this is where it gets even more tricky with some of the calls the Steelers are going to have to make. Now, I want to focus on the defensive line because that's going to be an interesting group. As I said, before the season even started, I predicted them to try to keep 7 defensive linemen. I have them doing that, and if you're looking at the screen right now on YouTube, you're probably thinking, whoa, wait a second, that guy hasn't played. My 7 here, for those who are listening on our podcasting platforms, our audio platforms, I've got Cam Hayward, Larry Ogunjobi, Tyson Alulu, Chris Wormley, Isaiah Loudermilk, DeMarvin Leal, and then Montravius Adams. Now, if you're looking at those, you're thinking, well, wait a minute, Montravius Adams, he hasn't played. He's been hurt. He's going to go on injured reserve. And the reason that if you're thinking, well, wait a minute, why didn't they do that before? Because they wanted to, when you can't put him on injured reserve, but why didn't they waive him before? Because they see him as an important part of their rotation on the inside at defensive tackle, nose tackle specifically even. And I think that they want to keep that value until whenever he's ready. And if he's not ready, which I don't think he is, they're going to put him on injured reserve, and you're probably going to see Henry Mondeau or one of the Davis twins clear waivers and then come back temporarily for the team to use. And then whoever doesn't come back on the 53-man roster will get put on the practice squad. It's not that complicated. I think the Steelers, they like what they've seen out of their starters. They want to see more out of their second guys. But I don't think this is a group that they particularly add to with free agency or finding another person from another area to join up in. I think that that's something that they'll do for this next group, maybe, with the way that things are working out. And that next group, of course, is the linebackers. This is where I think it's going to get truly interesting. Now, inside linebacker, I have them keeping 5 players: Miles Jack, Devin Bush, Robert Spillane, Buddy Johnson, and Mark Robinson. And you're probably sitting there saying, whoa, wait a minute. What about Chico? What about Marcus Allen? Nothing against Marcus Allen, but he's been hurt. And I think that that's a big problem when you look at what the Steelers need to have. They need to have healthy bodies who are playing on the inside. I think Mark Robinson acquitted himself well in special teams. Buddy Johnson had a good breakup in the red zone. Both of those guys are young linebackers who I think that the Steelers are excited to see continue to grow. Now, if Marcus Allen's healthy now and he's ready to get back to action, cool. But I'm not so sure how healthy he is. If he is, this could easily be a situation where maybe Buddy Johnson gets let go. And I know Buddy Johnson's a 4th-round pick just last year. But Mark Robinson looked to me like he was figuring it out. And I think that's a good sign for Mark Robinson. I think all in all, the Steelers are going to want to keep 5 linebackers, because I do think that they are 5, inside linebackers, because I do think that they see, injuries becoming a problem there, or just needing depth per se. But also I think they really like Mark Robinson. Everything I've heard from all of them, from Miles Jack to Devin Bush to anybody. They like his tenacity. They think there's something there. He just has to polish things up. He's recently reformed into a linebacker from a running back, in college. So I think there's positives there, and they want to work with those positives. But I think Marcus Allen being the unhealthy guy right now, not the unhealthy, the injured guy right now, he's the odd man out. But I wouldn't be surprised if he clears waivers and he comes back to the team at some point. Again, this is just the initial 53-man roster. But this is where it got tricky for me, because I went back and forth with this edge rushing situations. Hamilcar Rashed is, of course, the big question mark here. Everyone knows TJ Watt's making it. Alex Highsmith is making it. I have Derek Tuska making it. But Hamilcar Rashed, he got a lot of snaps. I think he played 47 snaps in this game, which good for him. It's a good sign that they have faith in him and they think that he could be the guy. But he also didn't look great out there, and he didn't exactly solve the third edge rushing option plan out there for the Steelers. And it looks like they could go get some help in that department. And that might be an area where you do see Omar Khan get a little busy and say, hey, we're just going to go get a vet. Now, some of you might say, what about Damontae Scott? He had a sack in the game. Yes, he did. But I think that they like the build of Damontae Scott, but the build isn't enough when it comes to playing regular season games. I think you're going to see the Steelers trying to make a move to get a solidified third edge rusher, a guy that will be the catalyst for the backups when TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith are off the field. Again, Alex Highsmith did tell reporters back a couple weeks ago that he was going to be ready for Week 1 against the Cincinnati Bengals. So you could take that concern off your plate right now. But as far as edge rushers, this could be an interesting place to keep 3 there for now, so that you can keep other guys that you trust, or that you're waiting to make a harsher decision on. And if you keep 3 there at the edge, it maybe gives you 1 extra guy you can keep on the offensive line, or 1 extra running back, or 1 extra safety, or 1 extra cornerback. And that's where it could get tricky. So I wouldn't be surprised if Hamilcar Rashed is actually not on the 53-man roster. But just when I was breaking things down, I just thought how the Steelers are going to want to react. The amount of snaps they gave him, I think that they're going to feel like confident, like, hey, he can at least hold it down for like a couple plays here and there while TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith do their things. Now, the last group, or that's 2 groups, last group on defense, we also have to talk specialists briefly. Let's get to the defensive backs, because this is where it gets also kind of interesting. Cornerback, they're keeping 5. And to me, Justin Lane is the odd man out. Ahkello Witherspoon, obvious. Cameron Sutton, super obvious. Levi Wallace, also super obvious. That's where you get into it and you say, James Pierre, he helps on special teams. He's sound. He can do his job. Maybe not to an extremely high level, but he can be serviceable at times. And then there's Arthur Maulet. And what I think is really good about this rotation is that you have guys who could play in the slot, and you have guys who could play outside, multiple options, multiple positions, and accountable, experienced defensive backs and cornerbacks, at that position there. So I think this is a smart move by the Steelers if they handle this. They're actually in a good corner spot. I think they could still use an ace corner in their pocket, but who knows? Maybe Cam Sutton is that. Maybe Ahkello Witherspoon is that. We'll find out as the season rolls along. But the safety position, this is also one that's going to be really interesting, because, I have them keeping 4 here. I have them keeping 5 cornerbacks, 4 safeties, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Terrell Edmunds, Damontae Kazee, and Trey Norwood. Now, as you see, if you're watching on YouTube, I have Damontae Kazee with the IR designation because he did mess up his wrist / arm pretty badly, and I think that's going to cause him to miss significant time. Now, I don't know if it's going to be the whole season or anything like that, but they're going to need that roster spot. So I think they're going to put him on the team, make sure he doesn't hit waivers, then put him on injured reserve, and then go and get somebody else. Now, Tony Jefferson, Ravens safety, was let go recently, actually on Monday itself. So that could be an option for the Steelers to say, hey, you know what? Let's bring him in to see how things go, because the Steelers right now, their last option in safety would be Elijah Ridley, who kind of just filled in. And I thought he did okay for what he had to do in the preseason game. But Elijah Ridley being that guy, I think is not the option that a lot of people thought was going to be was going to happen with this safety room going into the regular season. And to be fair, I mean, it took a lot of unfortunate situations for certain people to get there. You think about the safety room, not just Damontae Kazee, but this is a group that they had serious depth. Miles Killebrew went down at one point. Minkah Fitzpatrick came back, but this is a group that you're missing those 2 guys and Carl Joseph, who was more of a slot / safety guy, but that's 3 safeties who have been injured and taken out of the equation. And when you look at that, you're like, man, that guy's really your 7th option. I think the Steelers go find somebody else there. Maybe Tony Jefferson wants to get revenge on his Ravens. I wouldn't be surprised at that at all. But somebody at safety will be coming to the Steelers to replace Damontae Kazee once he's taken off injured reserve. They like that rotation too much. I do think this is also an opportunity for Trey Norwood to show how much he's grown in this offseason. That's going to be an interesting talking point. Otherwise, though, Fitzpatrick, Edmunds, they're going to be on the field almost every play anyways. Expect those guys to be comfortable there. Last group here, of course, the specialists, pretty straightforward. Chris Boswell is the kicker. Presley Harvin is the punter. Christian Kuntz is the long snapper. Don't need to really break that down. Presley Harvin still needs to get more consistent with his punts. You see him booming on occasions. Needs to boom it all the time. We'll see how he grows into that role as time progresses. But that's my 53-man roster projection. Roast me in the comments because I know I'm going to be wrong about something. Everyone always is at some point. But I'll be back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers, breaking things down, how it did play out in the 53-man roster, what's the biggest strength, what's the biggest weakness, and what moves Omar Khan might actually try to pull off. We'll talk all about that on the Wednesday edition of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks again for checking us out. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Watch this show on YouTube or listen to it on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Odyssey. Thanks for checking us out. Be back on your screens and in your ears very soon.